standing in the future and saying, what does it look like in 10 years? What does it look like that would have you want to be part of this in 10 years and having that conversation together?
Welcome to Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations, with your host, executive leadership coach and CEO of the Granger Network, Kari Granger, and me, Paul Adams, CEO of Sound Financial Group. This is the second episode of our four-part series on new futures, how to create a compelling vision.
Welcome back to the Leadership Impact. I'm Kari Granger, and today's episode is how to create visions that people want to be a part of, that are compelling, that garner action, that garner commitment. How do you create those visions? It's the second episode that we're doing inside of this kind of broader theme about declaring something new. So last episode, we talked about declarations. They initiate. Visions are a type of declaration. So I want to talk about visions because I see so many crappy ones out there that actually don't initiate action. Paul, what do you see about this?
I watch this happen, and sometimes you get a chance to see it from a distance and you don't know what's going on. And other times you can be close enough to something where you know people in an organization and you go, ooh, I think I know what's going on there. And so this story is a woman that has taken over this small firm. And now it's been over a year, like a year and a half. And in that period of time, there have been effectively zero results produced. In fact, maybe only negative ones, meaning revenue is down. In her role, what she has to do as the head of a financial firm is they're supposed to recruit a lot of people and to grow the firm. That's like the primary thing that she's charged with. And what's not happening is people are not joining. People that are there are not being as effective as they were before. And the people that do come on board are either quitting or languishing with little to no level of performance at all.
Yeah. So, just listening to you, we could go so many different directions with this, right? And I'd want to ask so many more questions. And just in light of the topic of today's episode, one thing that I hear is missing is a compelling future. So people like to act towards a compelling future. They don't act towards closed off possibilities for themselves, right? So if you look at this woman and this firm, this owner in this firm, do you get a sense that there even is a vision, or is it kind of absence of a vision?
What I would say is I think there is one. It's hers, meaning nobody else is sharing it. Mm-hmm. She has her goals, her objectives, and nowhere in like, here's what I want for my future is a place where the people in her organization, the people she wants to recruit to her organization can feel included.
Oh, that's so good, Paul. So we do act consistent with the future that we see for ourselves. So if we predict a future in which there is no future, or, there's no opportunity for myself, or I can't make a contribution here, or, there's no upward progression, my natural action is going to be one of exiting, right? Mm-hmm. Or withdrawing or doing the minimum, which is something that I hear. We've talked about this before. We often think that leadership is like the leader declares the vision. Mm-hmm. Leadership is really about co-creation, because we're always co-inventing together. So how do you create a vision that's really kind of a co-invention and addresses what's fundamentally important to all stakeholders? So let me bring up a few components to an effective vision and see if you think this could make a difference for this leader. Mm-hmm. So first of all, an effective vision starts from the future and looks back to the present. Now that, how do we make that practical, right? What does that mean? It's the difference between me standing here today and saying, ooh, I really want to grow this firm into $10 million firm or something like that, right? Versus standing in the future, kind of putting myself there in 10 years and saying, all right, what does it look like? And me not just looking at that, but me having the conversation with all of my constituents, right? And even my stakeholders, my clients, right? So my clients, my employees, maybe my partner firms, standing in the future and saying, what does it look like in 10 years? What does it look like that would have you want to be part of this in 10 years, and having that conversation together? So we stand in the future. When we create that, then we would look back into the present day and say, okay, now how did we get there? Okay, so that's one component. The other another component is that the future, when you actually create that vision, it must address the fundamental cares and commitments of those stakeholders, of the relevant stakeholders. So what does that mean? What's fundamentally important to them? When you're going to actually bring about, realize, achieve, manifest a vision, there are people who you need to align with you. And then there's people who are required to act. So they're not all the same, right? So some people need to align with where you're going. Some people, you're not going to get there without their actions. And then there's still others who are kind of impacted by this vision. So like your clients, you could really put them, maybe they're impacted by the vision. Yeah, your employees, you might say, they're really required to act. And then with a financial firm, maybe if you're part of a bigger, like I think of like an Edward Jones or something where there's a lot of, kind of franchises almost. I don't know if that's the right term, but it's
exactly right. There's a big financial institution that's kind of partnered in this, if you will.
Yeah. And so then, those would be like the corporate part or the bigger head, they'd be required to align. Yeah. So they're really kind of different categories. So in each of these categories, all three of these categories, to really be compelled and bought in and, be part of this vision, they have to see that this vision, this future, addresses in some way what's fundamentally important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's there's a special category for those who are required to act. So, Paul, if I'm going to ask you to take action to move towards that future we've created together, you're going to need to see an opportunity to make a noteworthy contribution and be recognized by it. And you're going to need to see an opportunity to really, express yourself, to act freely, to kind of put your whole self into it. This was such a critical piece that I got from my work with the Being a Leader group with Werner Erhard, Steve Safran, Michael Jensen, Jerry Echevarria.
Where you and I originally met.
Where you and I met. And, it was just so fundamental to getting like, wow, when you actually create a future, number one, you're not doing it by yourself as a leader. You're listening for what are the fundamental cares of what we called in that course, the relevant parties, or what you could call the stakeholders. What are their fundamental cares? What do they really care about? What's most important to them? And then to stand in that future and kind of be the place where all these different fundamental cares and commitments merge together. And so that you're making an articulation of what's there, of what's most important. And then those who are required to act, they actually see, oh, this future's for me. It's something important. I get to act. I get to make a noteworthy contribution. And not only that, but I get to be recognized for it. And then there's this last component. So I'm actually talking about 4 components. Starts there in the future, not here in the present.
Mm-hmm.
It addresses those fundamental cares and commitments of those, the relevant parties, of the stakeholders who have to align, act, and are impacted by. And then for those who have to act, they see an opportunity to express themselves, make a noteworthy contribution, and be recognized for it. And then this 4th one is that the vision, the future, occurs as compelling, it's inclusive, and it's bold. So it actually, when it's inclusive and bold, it generates positive energy. It generates a mood of ambition.
So, and I'm slow because I'm actually writing these down as we go. Standing in the future, care for the fundamental concerns, cares, and commitments of the stakeholders. There are those that are required to act, but even those that are required to act, like you will lose your job if you don't take action, you still have to produce a situation where they can make a noteworthy contribution to that future and be recognized for it. And then in the midst of all that, almost like if I could picture those big three things on a piece of paper and then in a watermark on the background, all encompassing is that it must occur to them as compelling and inclusive for their future.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I could go back to the example, I can tell you exactly where some of this went wrong.
Awesome. Let's hear it.
Which was one, I remember being in one specific conversation with this individual, and I knew the company that they're dealing with. I knew the situation. I actually am very familiar with the contract that the person has. And I said, I can be of help to you here. Given what I think that you care about and what they're going to require of you for the next 4 years, I could be of significant help in helping you navigate some of this and who the players are, all that. And what was said to me as somebody who could have been somebody in their world, I wasn't a stakeholder, but I was somebody who had the opportunity to make a noteworthy contribution, which is meaningful to some people, even if they're not stakeholders, was, don't you worry about my contract. I will worry about it.
See, that was exclusive, not inclusive.
Ah, yes. Well, and what happened was I just withdrew my help. I also withdrew harm. I didn't do anything to mitigate what they were up to. But then I watched from the outside as they decided to rebrand the firm. There was a legal problem with the first naming that they had to change. And it ended up being a Latin word that nobody knew what it meant. And it sounds funny. So people didn't find themselves in it. The advisors that were affiliated with the firm that were somewhat successful rebranded themselves under a totally different name. Still in the firm, still kind of contributing in their own way, but they're not making a noteworthy contribution to her future.
Yeah, because you don't do that for somebody else's future. It's always about you. Even if your future is, I really want to support this person, right? It's how the individual sees their future. And I just listened to how you withdrew. There was no future with her. There was no opportunity to make a difference. So the natural action is to withdraw.
Well, I think the people that can most contribute when they withdraw, it's real quiet. Like I didn't like throw a fit or send a mean email or something else. I just accepted the decline and moved on. And the same thing has happened even internal in that organization, where I know some of the high performers that are in that culture right now. And they're all like, she's doing her thing and I'm just taking care of my career, is kind of the overriding mood right now. And now here would be my big question. Let's say somebody's listening right now and they think to themselves, like, I may have done this in my organization, meaning I'm running into some problems. Maybe I got elevated recently to a director role, or I just acquired another company where I have a hard time getting people on board. If they're looking, what are some of the symptoms that they might notice, Kari, that would let them realize they've violated one of these 4 principles for creating a compelling vision? How would they know, and can they fix it? So, Kari, I can see right where these 4 things in this organization that I'm using as the example, these things have been violated. How would somebody know? So they're standing there, they're listening right now, they're driving into work, and they're like, their hand is on their head right now in traffic going, my goodness, I violated these. I have not created a compelling vision. Maybe that's why my team is misbehaving, or why these things are happening that seems like it's so hard to get to where we're going. 2 questions. One, how will they know if somebody's listening right now that maybe they violated some of this in creating compelling vision? And second, what can they do about it?
Yeah. Some of the symptoms you can look for is mood. So you can look for, apathy or cynicism or resignation or even resentment, confusion, any of the kind of more unproductive moods. You can look for non-action, minimal action. You can look for turnover. People start to look for other places. A lot of the symptoms you talked about in the beginning of the episode for this one woman leader that same symptoms. You can also ask people, what do you see as the future for yourself? And you'll hear, what do you think the vision is for this firm? What do you think we're focused on right now? And if you hear kind of, well, I don't know, right? Or making money, I guess, or whatever it is, you kind of hear it in their mood and what they say.
Yes.
And whether or not you see these symptoms, what I'm going to recommend anybody can do, even if you think you have a very compelling, inclusive vision, is 2 different conversations. Okay. First conversation is a conversation for care. What's most important to people? What do they really care about? And you listen, you ask and you listen, what's most important to you? And why do you care about that? And why do you care about that? What's most important to you about working for the firm here? What's most important to you about what we do in the future? So you're asking for what they fundamentally care about, what's fundamentally important to them. That's the first conversation. After you have that conversation, you can have it in individual or as a group. It's a great conversation as a group. Next episode, we'll talk about what do you do when, you can already tell there's a lot of bad mood and assessments. You can't even talk about a vision because, people are so skeptical and cynical that it could be anything else, right? We'll talk about that in the next episode. So that there might be a conversation to have before this. But even, what's most important to you? That's number 1. Number 2 is what we'll call a conversation for possibility. What's possible? If we stood in the future in 10 years, what do you see as possible for this firm? If you put on the shelf how to do it, what would light you up? What's the most important thing that we work on together? What do you think would be the biggest impact, the most compelling impact we could make? And just having people start to have these conversations for what's possible will go way further than having some flowery vision statement on the wall collecting dust. Because as people speak, they start to co-invent a future for themselves, which pulls them forward to take action.
Gosh, and I know, Kari, that as we listen to this podcast, as we all learn from you, I know we're supposed to use our powers for good, except I think in something you just said, what occurred to me might be one of the most effective tools to recruit somebody from an organization might be to ask those same questions about the other organization, like, what is their vision? And watch people grow up for the fact that they're a part of an organization where they don't know the vision.
Mm.
And then asking what's important to you and letting them say it. And then being able to share with them your vision for where you want to go with your firm or your team and how that might care for some of what they care about.
Mm-hmm. Paul, sorry, I interrupted you, please.
No, I just think like all of a sudden it's landing with me. Like, I think there's a way that for all of us, we probably need to be concerned as leaders, creating a compelling vision and caring for people the way you just mentioned, if for no other reason than to make sure that they work toward the compelling vision, but don't get distracted by outsiders. And maybe when I thought of it as a recruiting strategy, it's also a great way to start the conversation with anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking someday I want to do a podcast with you on the arc of transformative selling. Okay. Because these are what you just did is you started to move along that arc, right? So, and selling like the transaction of coming to work with my company, right? You're selling somebody on your company when you're recruiting. But you start with those conversations for care, same as sales, right? Then conversations for what's possible. So you're actually co-inventing a future with your recruit, for example, or your current employees, which is also really good, right? Then after the possibility is really ripe, see, this is when we have, then we start to move towards action. So now you're co-creating what are the possible pathways for action to fulfill on that possibility. This is how I do strategic planning is we start with that what's important possibility. Then the pathways for action is where you come up with the strategy. And then ultimately it's that specified action, which is what is the actual action that we're now going to take, right? Because people don't take action from just like this big possibility. They need pathways. So you actually kind of stepped us through that. And I'd love to do a whole episode on that someday.
And I got to tell you that I feel like, I don't know if our audience feels this way, but I've once again caught myself taking notes during our episode because I feel like I'm probably the best benefactor of us doing this podcast together in that I get to hear it first. I get to hear it again when we broadcast it. But this idea of creating a compelling vision, caring for the stakeholders, caring for, like, I think one thing people don't do, they don't care for the people that are required to act anyway. They're like, well, they'll lose their jobs if they don't. And they'll get on board eventually. And making sure that people are compelled by that future vision because we stood in the future and worked our way backward and kind of met them where they are as a part of the vision that we want to bring them to in the future. And certainly in my example today, that's exactly what I've noticed is probably all of those principles have been violated, not intentionally, but it's just somebody in a mindset of, I'm going to keep a positive attitude and work really hard, and it's all going to be fine.
Yeah. You know what I love about all this is it's not even to be nice or to be a good person. It's actually in service still of your bottom line. Now, at the Granger Network, we really care about all stakeholders thriving while our clients' profits rise, right? All stakeholders thrive while profits rise. And so, and that's what we find is when all stakeholders thrive, that naturally happens. So don't even do this to be nice. Do it to be effective, right? So if you want a room full of 10s, you got to be a 10. You know, you could have 25s who are compliant to your, your sole vision that you like, or not even a lack of vision. And you could lead by that transaction. Well, if you don't do it, you'll get fired. But that's not thriving, and you'll get what you get. But look, if you're being a 10 and you lead the creation of a vision that others are really compelled by, you're going to attract 10s. And you can have a lot less 10s who are working, way at a much higher level, much more effective. And so anyway, it's way more effective.
So, Kari, in leaving people going into the week this week, here's what I want to suggest. As you go into your work day to day, as you get through this week, ask a couple of people. It could be inside your church if you wanted to. It could be inside your family. It could be inside your workplace on your specific team. But just being able to ask, what's the vision of our firm? And see what they have. See how much of it's even translated to them. See if they see themselves in that future that you've wanted to create. And maybe take some time this week to just sit back with a yellow pad and jot out what you think your vision is, and then walk back through some of what we just covered about whether or not it's something that you've stood in the future and look back from. Does it take care of all stakeholders? Does it care for those who are required to act and give them a chance to be recognized? And then does that compel them to want to be a part of that future? Kari, once again, another podcast that both cared for me, my business, and all the people and stakeholders with whom I interact. And I think it's going to have been that valuable and more to everybody listening. So thanks to you and the Granger Network for putting this on and making sure that we could best care for our leadership impact as we go through the week.
Thanks for joining us today, Paul. As always.
Thank you for tuning into Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations. Subscribe now at grangerNetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And to support you in your leadership impact, we've created an exclusive set of guiding questions on today's topic. Just text the word vision to 900-900 and you'll receive the link. If you like what you're hearing, you will love our online courses, which will transform your performance and leadership over 4 months with videos, practices, and group Q&As. These online courses are our approach to essential development for professionals. We also have a live workshop coming up next month on productivity and accomplishment to support you in setting yourself up powerfully for 2019. Find it all at grangerNetwork.com and join us for our next episode on New Futures.